Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third and last day of the 2020 AIA Austin Design Excellence Conference and our keynote session in defense of density. I am Eric Rauser, AIA Austin President, and I'm happy to welcome our honored speaker, Ruchika Modi, and all of you to this last day of the conference. It has been a truly unique experience, and we are glad that you've all decided to join us and participate. I wanted to thank our keynote sponsor, Daglish Construction, for their support of this conference and for their many years of support for AI Austin. So let's watch a quick video about their company. I think we still don't have sound.
Has partnered with Austin's best and brightest architects, designers, clients, artisans, and engineers to build Austin. Throughout all phases of construction, on each of the homes we've built, during every season of those 40 years, our commitment has been to deliver the highest quality construction because details matter. Over the years, we've learned that success is measured not only in the level of product that we can build, but also in the amount of enthusiasm our clients have in recommending us.
We wanted a home that was not just beautiful and didn't just have great finishes, but actually was really soundly constructed at its heart.
They paid attention to every little detail, the tile, the countertops, the color on the walls, the way the house sits on the lot.
People feel happy to be in an environment that is welcoming, that's open, that flows well. We're grateful to have worked with Daglish. We're excited to encourage others to. Really couldn't imagine working with any other builder.
Our job doesn't end when the home is completed. Daglish's home care services team provides full service, ongoing care of the homes that we build, to give our clients peace of mind that we stand behind our construction.
The home services is an excellent feature for us, especially because we don't live here yet. There's just a lot of peace of mind with that.
We not only provide our services throughout the Austin area, but have a talented team bringing Daglish quality to the Texas Hill Country as well. Daglish Construction have enjoyed creating with you over the past 40 years and look forward to many more years of partnership in keeping Texas beautiful.
Right. Thank you again to Daglish Construction. And now our speaker. We are incredibly honored to have Ruchika Modi here with us today, or virtually with us today. Ruchika is an architect and the managing principal at POW in New York City, Practice for Architecture and Urbanism. She is currently overseeing such projects as the design of the Domino Sugar Refinery in Brooklyn, New York, an adaptive reuse project to transform a factory into offices with a mixed-use ground floor, the master plan and design of 41 buildings as a part of a mixed-use new development in Ulanvatar, Mongolia, and a 100,000 square meter mixed-use market hall, office, and residential project in Panama City, Panama. Before joining POW, Ruchika as a senior associate at Standard Architects and a founding partner of Studio R & Star in New York City. She has also worked at Smith, Miller, and Hawkinson Architects. Ruchika holds a Master's of Architecture degree from the Graduate School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation at Columbia University, where she was awarded the Charles McKim Prize for Excellence in Design, Saul Kaplan Traveling Fellowship, the William Kinn Fellows Prize for Study and Travel Abroad, and the Lucille Smizer Lowenfish Memorial Prize. She received her BA in economics from the University of Delhi and a BA with distinction in interior architecture from the California College of Arts, San Francisco. Her work has been exhibited at the Center for Architecture in New York, the International Architecture Biennale in Rotterdam, and the China International Architectural Biennale in Beijing. To all of you, thank you so much for attending the Design Excellence Conference, and thank you and welcome Ruchika Modi.
Good morning, and thank you, Eric. I'm honored that you've decided to take the time to spend your morning with me. But before I dive in, I'd like to come clean and admit that I have great ambivalence about city living, which of course is ironic given the subject at hand. For every vacation, I flee the city to go spend time in nature as far away from asphalt and crowds as possible. That said, I love the natural landscape too much to invade it for daily living, because then I'd destroy the very thing I love. So let's get started. I'll start by discussing the obvious, how density relates to climate change through responsible land use, resource conservation, and a lower carbon footprint per capita. So please bear with me. But then I'll talk about how density is about more than just dry statistics. It directly impacts issues relating to equity and inclusion. It's about creating the world we want, one that's joyful and humane. So let's jump right into the eye of the storm, so to speak. Hurricane Harvey was a major storm with extensive rainfall, but it was not a natural disaster. The disaster was caused by planning decisions, or really a lack of planning, to allow for development to occur in a hurricane zone without taking appropriate measures. Houston, the city with no limits, conveys the promise of boundless opportunity, but it's also the largest US city to have no zoning laws, which is of course part of a hands-off approach to urban planning that contributed to catastrophic flooding from Hurricane Harvey and left thousands of residents in harm's way. According to environmentalists and experts in land use and natural disasters, growth that is virtually unchecked, including in flood-prone areas, diminished the land's already limited natural ability to absorb water. And the city's drainage system, which is a network of reservoirs, bayous, and as a last resort, roads that hold and drain water, was just not designed to handle the massive storms that are now increasingly common. An analysis of flood damage by the New York Times showed how Houston is a case study for the dangers of not thinking holistically about development and climate change. This image shows you FEMA's flood risk zones across the city outlined in orange. They catastrophically failed to predict the way floodwaters would impact Houston's newest areas of exurban sprawl. In neighborhood after neighborhood, buildings outside the official floodplain but adjacent to water bodies were also inundated in ways that could have been predicted with by a more serious study of how sprawl has brought us to this point. This was not a process that happened overnight. This disaster was building in slow motion over the last 2 decades. Land far outside the city center that would historically not have been considered prime for development was devoured in pursuit of short-term profits. And it was these areas that proved to be some of the most vulnerable. So how can we fix this? From a policy perspective, addressing the relationship between climate change and the built environment would take more than band-aid solutions and cleaning up after the fact. One key component of this, of course, is density itself. So recent research has validated what proponents of cities have felt to be true for decades, that while cities themselves might be large sources of greenhouse gases, denser patterns of built fabric can allow people to live with a smaller carbon footprint per capita. We all know by now that the closer together we live on land that is suitable for human habitation, the better it is for the environment. And while urban areas generate 70% of the world's carbon dioxide, per capita is another matter, which also makes cities a good place to start making a difference. This graph illustrates that there is no need for us to sprawl across the planet. It's meant to be a provocation, so please don't take it literally. The entire world population could fit in the state of Texas at a density of approximately 25 units per acre, which is roughly what you need to support rapid mass transportation. What does this look like? Like many of our coveted neighborhoods in Brooklyn, not Manhattan, Brooklyn, like Cobble Hill, parts of Williamsburg, Greenpoint. In Austin, I believe it's the same density as your West Campus. And those of you who are familiar with LA, it's the same as Culver City. But let me clarify, I'm not advocating for density for its own sake. Clearly, this is not a desirable solution. None of these are, and in fact, they're counterproductive. They only serve to alienate people. Where's the joy? Take Songdo, Korea, for instance, sometimes described as the world's smartest city. It's a top-down, $40 million smart city project with wildly effective trash and recycling systems, an abundance of parks, over 200 million square feet of LEED certified space, and that's only just the beginning. Yet in their attempt to design this high-tech city of the future, planners have ultimately created an incredibly lonely place to live. It feels more like a sparsely populated American 1970s suburb, just arranged in a grid. If you build it, they won't just come. Our cities need to be different. They need to be delightful and magnetic to hold a distinctive appeal for new green urbanites. So hopefully we're finally reaching an important milestone in thinking about density. It's about more than resource conservation, more than the environmental benefits it affords. Take the fact that municipalities like Minneapolis are instituting a plan to upzone the entire city by 2040. Their proposal focuses on increasing density as a reliable way to not just decrease emissions and improve the environment, but equally importantly, to simultaneously address social issues like equity, especially housing affordability. Others are also following suit. In Massachusetts, Governor Baker proposed a bill that would make it easier to upzone. In Seattle, and Seattle is attempting to upzone more of the city to accommodate its growing population. Just 13% of the land that has been rezoned for higher density has already absorbed half of the city's population increase since 2010. I should point out though that density isn't just urban. This is an agricultural farming town in Japan and a village in India where people live close together, surrounded by the fields where they work. And UK follows the same logic. What is common amongst all these street level photographs of small towns and villages across the globe is not just this idea of shared resources, but also this profound sense of community that is created by the dense land use patterns. But let's return to cities, because that's where 70% of the world's population will live by 2050. In absolute terms, that's 70% of 9.7 billion, an increase of about 2 billion compared to today. As our cities are evolving, we've seen a shift from a highly centralized business district model to one that is more distributed, what you see in the center diagram. Cities now have multiple nodes where people convene to work. And as this trend continues, with the right regulations in place, we should be heading towards an even greater networked city, where mixed nodes of live, work, learn, and play form an interconnected network, such that within each node, we can meet 80% of our daily needs within a 15 to 20-minute walk. In other words, placing density at the center of climate change mitigation strategy means not just doing the right thing in terms of cutting emissions, but truly offering tangible, immediate benefits as a selling point. Overall, increased density means more opportunities for walkable neighborhoods and car-free transit, which would in turn cut pollution, reduce congestion, reduce road fatalities, and improve health and general quality of life. And clearly this is an idea whose time has come. Paris Mayor Anne Hidalgo, one of our heroes, was influenced by it in her vigorous implementation of pedestrian and bike networks throughout the city. And then meanwhile, stateside, we're beginning to see political rumblings, similarly addressing the need for better planning that has manifold outcomes from social to environmental. A number of candidates in the 2020 Democratic primary recognized that access to affordable housing is equally tied to both racial and environmental justice. They made the previously esoteric policy connection between land use regulations and access to regional transportation, between economic well-being, social justice, and climate change. And Biden's platform actually contains an impressive degree of specificity around how the federal government can wield both carrots and sticks to encourage municipalities to plan for growth in a way that's not just sustainable, but also equitable. Which brings us to the currently empowered reactionary elements in this country, hopefully not for too long, the NIMBY in chief, who has resurrected segregation-era racial rhetoric about housing affordability, urban density, racial mixing, and home values that drove white flight, exclusionary zoning, and discriminatory lending practices over the last 70 years, which is quite ironic for a self-styled real estate mogul. And then the supposedly libertarian right joins the president's blatant attempts to stoke white anxieties about integration, framing the issue as one of local control and personal choice to live in the suburbs. But this call for self-determination and liberty does little to hide appeals to a racist and xenophobic political base. But those of us who know better also need to do better. There's no shortage of those of us on the left who, while supporting affordable housing construction in theory, oppose density either because they have A, internalized connections between density and home value decline without understanding the racial history of the trope, or B, are tied to Jane Jacobian ideas of neighborhood character. In either case, the result is a politics that is both xenophobic and resource intensive, one which, knowingly or not, is both harming marginalized communities and contributing to climate change. I ask you, how are these images not oxymoronic? We create sprawl by artificially limiting the number of homes that are built near transit and job centers. This restrictive zoning creates mobility inequity, environmental inequity, inequities relating to access to healthcare, to education. There is no equal opportunity for all until we allow our neighborhoods to grow and densify. And then more excusable, less explicitly racist concerns about density have emerged, irrespective of political affiliations, during the current pandemic, stemming from the virus's early appearance in the relatively dense Seattle and New York metropolitan regions, despite the fact that the outbreaks in these two areas began in decidedly suburban Kirkland and New Rochelle, respectively. And then beyond this anecdotal evidence, we know now, based on global case studies, the problem is not density itself, but the intersection between density and public policy. But defending density goes even further, beyond resource conservation and beyond social and environmental equity. Let me take a moment here to share the lure of cities put forth by Greek city planner Doxiadis by way of Charles Correa's book, New Landscape. Pictured on the left is a village of about 250 orange dots and one blue one. Who is this blue person? Einstein, the village idiot? Who knows? He or she is different. Now imagine a town of 1,000 people. There are 4 to 5 blue dots floating around in a sea of orange. Next, a town of 25,000 people. Finally, 2 blue people meet for the first time. And lastly, a town of 10,000 inhabitants with several colonies of blue people. And on the fringes of these colonies, some of the orange dots are turning pink. So what does this mean? Let me pause the slides just for a moment to put a fine point on this. That's what well-designed cities, well-designed density is all about. Different people meeting, communicating, challenging, and changing one another. Our very way of life depends on this. Democracy relies on the friction that comes from encounters with difference. The city is the last and best hope for humanity. And as architects, we of course must share the stewardship of this hope. Which brings me to what we at POW use as our dividing rod, as our driving design methodology, as we try to address the pressing issues of our era, to focus on social and environmental impact through the tangible improvement of cities. We start by understanding place. You need to read a place before you can write in it, in terms of climate, context, construction techniques. We then layer in the needs of the client, of the community and the city, such as program, regulations, and budget. And finally, we try to create a connection a connection that is social, cultural, and emotional in response to the architecture. Taken together, place needs connection forms its own paradigm in that our society needs more connection and less polarization, perhaps now more than ever. I'll now take you through 3 projects at the scale of a city neighborhood, at the scale of a few city blocks, and at the scale of a building that illustrate this place needs connection approach I just mentioned. So let's begin with Sunnyside Yards. Sunnyside Yard is currently a 180-acre active rail yard in Western Queens, about 10 minutes from Midtown Manhattan. It's a critical piece of regional rail infrastructure built in 1910, before the bridges, tunnels, and subways, and long before much of the surrounding neighborhoods. It's one of the busiest passenger rail yards in the country. Amtrak, the majority landholder here, is in the process of upgrading the yard and wanted to make sure that the improvements would not preclude the opportunity for an overbuild down the line. So POW was engaged by the city of New York to master plan a new neighborhood that could be built on a deck over this rail yard. The site is surrounded by some of Queens' most low-lying and therefore climate vulnerable neighborhoods. So one critical planning priority from the very outset was to address this need, to mitigate risks due to climate change through public amenities and improved infrastructure, which are designed to withstand intensified weather in an area that's outside the floodplain. We also felt strongly that Sunnyside Yard must not just address this need for resiliency for itself, but also for its surrounding neighborhoods in Western Queens. Because we need to deck over an active rail yard and maintain clearances for operations, this plan would create new elevated land that is largely outside future floodplains. It can also house public amenities and resources that can become community hubs in times of emergency, and then decentralized infrastructure and resilient building systems designed for climate shocks can help ensure that these places remain functional. Now, it's not breaking news that New York needs more affordable housing. Sunnyside Yard presents the opportunity to co-locate affordable homes and high-quality open space, schools, libraries, and other public services. This, along with improved access to transit, can help mitigate the disparities that currently exist. This combination of resiliency and equity can also help address the issue of so-called climate gentrification, where low-income populations are more exposed to risk because wealthier people can just afford to pay for added protection, like hiring private firefighters in LA or affording homes outside flood zones that are, increasingly in high demand, or affording healthcare as climate increasingly affects public health. However, in order to make sure that this framework actually locks in these benefits, it is critical that the plan be flexible enough to accommodate inevitable changes over many decades. All this is extremely expensive and difficult to execute. The new neighborhood has to be constructed over a critical piece of functioning infrastructure that can only accommodate very limited partial downtime. The full build out of the yard could take upwards of a century, which is well beyond any reasonable demographic projection or likely guesses at the direction of technological progress. So creating a plan that could easily adapt when faced with these unknown unknowns was amongst our first principles. To begin thinking about how this might work, we looked at how our cities were built during pre-industrial times and responded to pre-industrial constraints like masonry and timber construction, row house typology, horse-drawn carriages. These factors changed drastically with the Industrial Revolution. That gave us modern conveniences like the elevator, high-rise steel construction, the internal combustion engine. And then ever since then, we've been trying to shoehorn post-industrial uses into pre-industrial blocks. And of course, the drastic growth in population has made matters more dire. We went from about 910 million in 1800 to more than 7.7 billion today. Smaller blocks like those in Portland seemed most able to deal with the changing building typologies because the general street grid provided light and air for buildings much larger than those initially anticipated. However, there's a rigidity to a plan that accommodates only one building per block that we wanted to avoid. We then began to think about the present paradigm shifts in urban program. The sharp dividing lines between uses that Jane Jacobs and her followers began to break down in the 60s are now getting even more blurred. These changes suggest a return to horizontality with buildings that have large flexible floor plates. There are also new advances in flexible and ad hoc modes of public transit that can adapt to changes in demand. Obviously, in addition to what's in flux, we focused on what is fixed. We all know what those are. And then through an iterative process with those needs in mind, we settled on a 60-foot grid module that could flexibly accommodate both building and street dimensions. And a typical block size of 240 by 240, which is small enough to enable pedestrian choice and some of the benefits of the Portland blocks, but large enough to allow for more options than point towers, giving more space for courtyard building types to breathe. Also, the choice of square blocks created a non-hierarchical grid, which when combined with the potential of joining blocks together for either open spaces or special programs, reinforced our goal of flexibility. This resulting grid is threaded between two arterial corridors, which connect to the 4 existing bridges that currently span the yard. The clearance requirements necessitated by the rail uses below meant that connecting grid to arterials to bridges was the most feasible way to create access to and from this new neighborhood. And then at strategic points, as you see here, placed to facilitate transit access, the grade change between the surroundings and the deck could be bridged by new open spaces, new public open spaces defined by generous stairs and elevators. And then at other points, like the new corridor would allow the existing building along the edge of the deck to construct new second floor entrances, navigating the grade change through the section of the building itself. Now with through traffic and access diverted to the edges, the urban fabric at the heart of the plan is free to be more focused on connections, on pedestrian and daily life. The possibility of limiting access to smaller public autonomous vehicles eliminates the need for curbs and for timed crossings, putting the priority on people. We conducted a robust community engagement program as an integral part of the 2-year master planning process. This street grid that I just showed you became the armature that supported 6 key needs that were identified by the community. One of the 6 needs, not surprisingly, was a network of open space to serve one of New York's most underparked areas. This network facilitated connections both across the master plan and to the surrounding neighborhoods. And then a wide range of both active and passive open spaces were planned based on what we heard in our community outreach effort. And then this open space plan was then overlaid with a network of social infrastructure like schools, health clinics, and libraries. These programs are arranged along the plan's central greenway. It's the spine that links all of the open spaces together to both address community needs, but also to activate the new parks and thereby creating spaces of connection between residents, workers, visitors, including those from the surrounding neighborhoods. And to ensure access to these new public goods and new public space by a wide range of New Yorkers, as well as to support the proposed development, of course, a multifaceted transportation strategy was designed, which includes street design that encourages walking, cycling, and other modes of micromobility, access points to facilitate connections to existing subway lines, a new bus rapid transit route connecting Midtown to the Yard and onto the underserved parts of Queens to the south, and a multimodal Sunnyside station, which would connect all of the above to the wider regional rail network, including quick train-to-air train rides to all 3 of the region's major airports. Now, Sunnyside Station was envisioned from the very beginning as more than just a station, with the potential to serve as a civic hub for the larger neighborhood, with a major entry plaza and cultural, retail, and co-working programs, that would complement both commuters, but also set up the station as a destination in its own right. There were commercial, light industrial, and institutional research space within the plan, creates connections to the existing industrial business zones nearby, and obviously downtown Long Island City. It also encourages walking commutes for residents and reverse commutes for workers from elsewhere in the city. And then all of these other uses are surrounded by 100% affordable housing, which makes up the bulk of the proposed new built area, with a range of densities that respond to the neighborhoods, the character of the surrounding neighborhoods. As you can see, there's more density on the north than there is to the south. Public transit access, and the sun path. You'll see that the taller buildings near Long Island City and shorter buildings along the southern edge of the site, respecting the scale of Sunnyside Gardens, also allowing greater solar access in the planned open spaces. While a certain minimum amount of density is critical to make the project, both economically viable, but also urbanistically responsible, a sensitivity to the distribution of density across the yard was critical in gaining support from the community. The plan also anticipates the use of sustainable best practices throughout, but as I mentioned previously, these are not just an overlay of box-checking goals. For instance, the use of mass timber at the neighborhood scale could jumpstart a supply chain and trained labor force that makes the method more viable elsewhere in the city. It acts as a mass carbon sink, storing 500 kilograms of CO2 per metric ton of timber used, and also decreases the loading requirements of the deck compared to other heavier materials like concrete or steel. So this is an image of the yard as it stands today. It does little for the surrounding neighborhoods, and in fact, it kind of acts as a barrier. This is what it could look like after a full build out. The provision of more resilient, decentralized infrastructure to support all of the public goods in the plan makes Sunnyside Yard and all of its surrounding neighborhoods much more capable of dealing with climate change. The area is also made accessible to a wider population through the provision of affordable housing and transit infrastructure, so that more people will be both more secure during catastrophic events and better able to live smaller footprint lives on a day-to-day basis. And this is precisely what we mean by density and thoughtful, forward-thinking planning, addressing local needs holistically alongside the urgent need for climate action. Now let's jump from Queens to Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia, the coldest capital in the world, with a population of just over 1.5 million, which is about half of the country's overall population. The Soviet-era planners designed the city for no more than 600,000 people. This is a photograph we took from the plane as we were about to land. The city is a paradox. It is both on its way to becoming a dense urban center, while also being home to a centuries-old nomadic culture in a country that's still predominantly rural. And while the city is densifying, unfortunately, the most recent development considers neither local cultural preferences nor its own negative impact on the environment. Currently, about 60% of the city's population lives in the peripheral urban sprawl known as the Ger districts, named after the yurts, or gers as they're called here, the round, white, nomadic tent structures you see in the image on the left. These districts have little to no urban infrastructure, no heat, no sanitation. They typically burn coal or sometimes trash to keep warm. And then the residents commute to the city's central business district daily in their gas-guzzling SUVs, leaving the city at a standstill during commute hours, with gridlock being a daily reality. And I don't need to spell out what this means in terms of pollution, in terms of public health, climate resiliency, and just general quality of life. So while the city might be dense in its current state, it is unsustainable. POW has been commissioned to design a roughly 500,000 square foot mixed use neighborhood or village, as our client calls it, in the heart of the city. This is the densest part of the city. Our site is owned by the National Amusement Park, a Soviet legacy, and sits directly adjacent to the park and minutes from the main civic square. This was our initial party diagram that illustrates the concept of an urban nomad that very much stems from the notion of place needs connection, as I previously described. We asserted that to be a city dweller is also to be a nomad, as in the tradition of the flaneur, and that at their best, both urban and rural lifestyles center on freedom, on autonomy, and on self-determination. So cities, when designed well, allow the same independence that nature provides, the ability to roam, to explore, to both lose and rediscover yourself. And it was this sketch that actually won us the commission, and eventually turned into this site massing. So the project is truly a mixed-use, walkable city center from live-work lofts and local retail, each at about 30% of the total gross area, office at about 15%, and then the remainder comprised of restaurants, a nightclub, a folk art theater, indoor playground, and even a haunted house. When we took on this commission, we had no idea that we would end up designing 41 buildings. That large development you see rendered in white to our immediate northeast is this. It's a hotel and shopping mall, sadly representative of most new development in the city. And I would argue completely devoid of any sense of place, no matter how much it might align with sustainable design practices. We, on the other hand, turned to what is quintessentially Mongolian, the stunning landscape, the flora and fauna, the big blue skies, what the people really hold most dear, and used that as our inspiration for the material palette. Again, rooted in place, rooted in connection. The landscape also inspired our form studies as the undulating angled rooftops echo the majestic mountains nearby. And then combine these form studies with the mixed-use program, and you'll arrive at this catalog of buildings. The majority that we classify as typical buildings are about 2 to 3 stories of live-work lofts with retail below. The special public program buildings are all unique. They all respond to specific needs, but belong to the same mountain range, formally speaking. We proposed adding an observatory, a tall structure that allows you to go high above the ground and take stock of your surroundings, from the village itself to the amusement park to the surrounding mountains, which is what you see in this view of the village taken from the adjacent hotel. The result, we think, is a modern urban neighborhood that looks to the city's past and future needs, while also connecting with Mongolia's rich history and beautiful landscape, wherein people are encouraged to stroll through and around the buildings, to linger or pass through the plazas, in multiple meandering paths of movement and repose, enjoying the key ideals of both urban and nomadic life, autonomy and discovery. We broke away from the traditional building typologies that are designed to control the pedestrian, and instead offer a non-linear, non-gridded site plan, which is interrupted by a network of outdoor spaces that we refer to as campfire moments. This is a series of public plazas that are flexibly designed to serve as places of repose or as sites for more organized retail or entertainment. This one is located in the liminal zone between the village and the amusement park and bonds the two together spatially and programmatically. So the village responds to its natural surroundings in a multitude of ways. From a practical standpoint, the layout of buildings with respect to the plazas modulate solar exposure as needed and provide wind shielding when necessary. This, combined with radiantly heated urban furniture in the plazas, extends the use of outdoor spaces to the shoulder seasons, a feature that comes in direct response to the needs of a people that much prefer outdoor living. The shape of the roofs and the size and location of windows maximizes daylight while minimizing heat loss. And then the exterior wall construction is designed to provide thermal mass that's appropriate for the climate, and it obviates the need for air conditioning in the live-work lofts. I was there in the summer and it gets really hot. Through thoughtful design and the use of local materials and construction methods, We think that the village not only invests in the needs and ways of life of its residents, but it also helps a country searching for its modern identity shape a way of living sustainably without losing what makes it unique. And the last project I'll show you, we're now back to New York, this time the Brooklyn Waterfront. So this the Brooklyn skyline that you see pictured here has long been dominated by the Domino Sugar Refinery, an industrial urban landmark, which was constructed by Henry Halfmeyer in the 1880s. In 2004, the operation moved to the Bronx, leaving the once vibrant working waterfront vacant. In 2017, Powell started the design for its adaptive reuse, returning the building to life as the nerve center of a new working waterfront, but transformed to meet the needs of the 21st century as a mixed-use neighborhood. The original structure that you see here was built to consolidate three functions inside three conjoined buildings. And although the floors and windows across the three buildings are completely misaligned, together they give the entire structure this singular monumental appearance. So first came the filter house, where the raw sugar solution was filtered. Then came the pan house that contained the giant pans for boiling and separating the solution. And finally, the finishing house, where the grains of sugar were separated, roasted, and dried. The process required the use of enormous equipment housed in cavernous multi-story spaces, which were purposefully obscured by the repetitive punched arch openings in the masonry. We had a lot of fun creating this drawing based on old photographs and what we could glean from the little that remained. And the rest was filled in by our vivid imagination. So there's some creative license there. So this is what it looks like on the inside. Small windows and deep floor plates, not quite suited to the stringent light and air needs of a modern day workplace. Our initial party sketch, the idea of nesting a brand new building within the existing envelope to create this unique dialogue between the old and the new, address the two issues I just described. The misaligned windows and floors across the four facades, a constraint imposed by place, and the need for light and air, a design driver imposed by needs. So by pulling back from the original walls, we could preserve, but literally bypass the idiosyncrasies of the existing historic structure, and also achieve ideal and standardized floor heights, creating office space that is designed to meet the needs of the 21st century worker and not machinery. So having arrived at our initial party, we immediately commissioned a photon analysis to test our belief that this light and airy perimeter would enhance natural light penetration to the core, and turned out it did. The study also helped us arrive at the optimal dimensions for the gap, which is about 10 to 12 feet. And as this photograph shows you, our strategy of holding back from the masonry was in no way alien to the structure. And in a way, we inadvertently, in responding to place and needs, ended up replicating the historic condition, which is a freestanding facade braced back to the superstructure, and the sense of autonomy between the interior configuration and the exterior expression, which in its new incarnation will look something like this. With the new curtain wall to the left and the historic brick facade to the right, the open air gap in between becomes a place for casual encounters and allows the historic structure to be appreciated in an unobstructed form. A view from the inside out, the array of historic windows, uninterrupted by any interior partitions, reveal expansive views of Manhattan. And while the view might be punctuated by the existing window openings, your mind's eye completes the vista. So now that we'd arrived at a party for the building approach, the next big question for us was, what form should this building take? So these are models, just a few of them that we tried on for size. But we kept coming back, we kept returning to the quintessential industrial archetype, the barrel vault, not just for its pragmatics, long spans, the flexibility afforded by column-free interiors, but more importantly, for its resonance with the refinery building, which has been classified by preservationists as the American round arch style. So the initial party sketch evolved into this. We feel that the two together, the masonry envelope and the barrel vault, form a dialectic, a connection such that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And the sketch further evolved into this building cross-section. You can see here the curtain wall held back and the superstructure extending through it to brace the masonry, which, by the way, is a very tricky knife plate detail. And two other benefits emerged from this approach. The new building foundations don't disrupt the existing foundations of the existing masonry, which would have severely complicated construction. And we were able to recess the mechanical penthouse within the barrel vault right above the core so that none of it is visible from any angle. And we all know that doesn't happen too often. So the result is a state-of-the-art, about 430,000 square foot workspace housed within a beautiful idiosyncratic urban artifact that is unique to post-industrial Williamsburg and offers a singular experience for its inhabitants and the larger community alike. This is a typical office floor plan designed to work for both single tenants and easily demised for multi-tenants. That consolidated split center core looks deceptively simple. We worked on it for ages with our client, 2-Tree Management, in order to get it right. It serves a multitude of needs in a very tight and efficient footprint so that we could achieve the desired lease spans. A bird's eye view shows the sunken mechanical penthouse hovering over the penthouse floor, which most likely will be devoted to more public uses rather than office space. We just went through a design assist process with the curtain wall contractor and completed the CDs. The barrel vault curtain wall system is a steel ladder frame assembled and pre-glazed in the shop with hot bent IGUs as a 4-unit wide mega panel, and it's lifted into place, which helps control quality and it eases construction logistics and budget. So here's a view from the east. You can see rising above the historic structure, a new glass barrel vault, which is more visible from the Brooklyn side than it is from the masonry because of the existing brick facade. It echoes both the American round arch style as well as the singular masonry form in which the original refinery was rendered. So zooming out, the refinery sits in the center of a new waterfront park, and it's intended to be the crown jewel of this new mixed-use neighborhood with creative office space, market rate and affordable housing, neighborhood retail, and community facilities. The conversion of the refinery to office space and not condos as was once considered helps enable that 15-20 minute walk in the city for a neighborhood that has seen an abundance of residential development in past decades. So one of our goals was to enable a seamless public connection from the neighborhood to the stunning quarter-mile long waterfront Domino Park. And to that end, we created this drawing, which is a riff on a NOLI plan, to understand and document the accessibility and flow of public space within and through the building. As we all know, office buildings are hermetically sealed for all kinds of reasons. The public is usually not welcome. Our client has a very different attitude and encouraged a radical departure from the norm. We see the ground floor as a public vestibule for the park, an accessible threshold between neighborhood and waterfront. So one could enter the building on the city side and walk right through to the park. The program of the ground floor too will complement outdoor recreational uses. And then finally, a drawing we created for the Landmark Preservation Commission to illustrate this concept of the public access. We propose transforming all the windows to doors to create this porous enfilade that welcomes the public in. So this is where office tenants meet eyeball to eyeball with neighborhood residents, meet with park goers from across the city, meet with tourists. And because we believe that every act of architecture is also an act of urbanism, this place of connection can actually have a tangible impact on the city around it. So to conclude, I'm defending density not just for its more obvious benefits relating to responsible land use, and resource conservation. But equally importantly, I'm putting a fine point on the right kind of density that also addresses the pressing socio-political issues of our era, from enabling equity and inclusion to inciting true democracy. These issues are spatial in nature, and what we do as architects, whether it's master planning neighborhoods or designing door thresholds, invariably makes a lasting impact on our society. Thank you. Eric, I think you're muted.
You're right. I've been doing this for 6 months now, and I still do that every time.
It's a global phenomenon.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. What a great presentation. We have one question in our Q&A. If anybody has any questions for the speaker, please do type them into the Q&A, and I will do my best to get them answered. So Ted Young has a question about our city, and how many in Austin favor density, but apprehensively anticipate it destroying parts of the city that are dear and give it character, and that it will mostly be a boon to developers. There's also a fear that densification will displace people by raising certain land values and property taxes, and that it will encourage gentrification. Can you suggest ways that Austin could avoid these potential downsides to densification?
It's a really good question, and it's something that's actually pervasive, right? Like every city, every neighborhood that has the potential to densify is facing similar challenges. So I would begin by saying that firstly, this can't just be a private sector initiative. The city has to step in. The city has to legislate. And let's take Domino, the one that I just presented. There's a large amount of affordable housing that has been included in it, which is, it's not just market rate, it's not just profit based. There's affordable housing, there's community facilities, there's public space, all mandated by the city. And I think that that's something that can only be brought in if the city intervenes. In terms of building character or erasing character, I would say that we're at a very different time and place now in our intervention in the city. If last century was about tabula rasa, about like erasing what's there and building new, this century is about maintaining, preserving, and sort of making new with what's already there. It's about preserving identity. So again, I bring up the Domino Sugar Refinery project, where they did maintain the one main building. They didn't erase it. So a lot of the new buildings around there were erased, and new ones were built. But there's this one building that is historic, that anchors it, that maintains neighborhood character. And I think we have to be sensitive about the way that we intervene and careful. I mean, it's not about mummifying neighborhoods, right? I mean, neighborhoods have to grow, but there are certainly opportunities to maintain and preserve and build on the existing character. And I think that's where architects have a lot of agency, right? Like we have to get out of Revit and, get out of the sort of, architects and developers, and get out of the sort of, easiest, most inexpensive way to build, and put some time and effort into it. Put some character back into the neighborhoods where we're taking some away. I think these are solvable problems, but they're solvable by a whole sort of network of people and thinking, which includes city officials, which includes communities, which includes developers, which includes architects. We all have to come together and agree upon what is the best way for our cities to densify. Muted again.
Ha, I did it again. As a follow-up to that idea, I'm also interested to know the slide that you had that showed pictures of all are welcome here, also don't, upzone our neighborhoods. is so interesting, and it's so something that we certainly experience here in Austin, in our neighborhoods. And I'm interested to know if you have, what is at the heart of that problem, and what is the solution for not just how we as architects behave and how the city behaves, but how we can, what conversations we can have with our communities, so that people start to understand what benefits density has and how they can enjoy it without being afraid of it.
Well, I think, as I mentioned when I was on that slide, there are two primary reasons I think that people oppose changes to their own neighborhood and growth and densification of their own neighborhood. One is, of course, linking that change and growth to their own home value decline, which of course does not have to be the case. And I think if you look around at case studies, that's not the case. Or it's about maintaining some Jane Jacobian idea of neighborhood character. And I mean, I don't know what to say other than you have to let go of those attitudes. If you truly believe in equity, if you truly believe in inclusion, if you truly care about the disenfranchised populations, then don't push them to the fringes of our cities, because that's not standing behind your beliefs. That's not putting where your money, where your mouth is. I think it's as simple as that. You have to bite the bullet. It's about, I truly believe in enlightened self-interest. I think capitalism was based on the foundation that people are rational, intelligent, and have this idea of enlightened self-interest, which actually goes beyond just your own short-term profit to something that would benefit the society at large and in turn benefit you and your generations to come. And I think it's about broadening your cone of vision and understanding how your actions impact, the community in which you live, especially if you claim to care about it.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Okay, another question from William Massengill. Do your current clients typically come to you because of your opinion of density with public access in mind, or do you sometimes have to convince a client to think about their projects in a different way?
It's, I would say it's more of the former and less of the latter. If you go to our website, we actually have a page on our website that clearly lists what we do and what we don't do. So I think before people come to us, they have a pretty good sense of, our base philosophy, our politics. It's just there for everyone to see. So yes, I think most of our clients come to us because they understand what we value and they share our values. And that's really when we have the most, important collaborations, the most fruitful collaborations. But there are some times that, there's some push and pull, and we've been able to bring our clients along with our point of view.
That's great. The list of what we as a firm do and don't do is a really great idea. It's something that was introduced by Bishan Chakrabarty to our community, and it generated a lot of conversation about how frightening and also necessary that statement is.
Yeah, it was very polarizing. People either loved it or hated it.
It's a great exercise to perform, even if you don't put it on your website. So we have another question. Can you speak more to how the City of New York identifies new areas for development that they initiate, and how the big picture process works for implementation of the all affordable housing proposed for the Sunnyside Yards project? This is from Sophia Razak.
So I think in terms, if I can talk to Sunnyside, that was Sunnyside Yard is predominantly owned by Amtrak. There is some MTA-owned land there, there's some city-owned land there, but predominantly it's Amtrak. And Amtrak was on its way to making several improvements to the yard. It's a very active, functioning yard, and they wanted to go and make some changes. and had the foresight to think about, the future, the changes that they're making now should be consistent and aligned with this, the possibility of overbuilding in the future and like decking it over and making, making a neighborhood over it. So they actually approached the city. The city issued an RFP, and we ended up winning that RFP. So that's how that project came to us. It went from Amtrak to city. Go ahead.
So I'm afraid I asked you a big question with only a little bit of time left, and so the unfortunate reality of this of our current technology is that we have to close the session. But thank you so much for participating. We really are enriched by this presentation, and we hope that you will come to Austin on the next opportunity, and we'll enjoy our city together. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.